Immigration into the UK is the topic of the moment. The Prime Minister, David Cameron, has just given his long-awaited speech on the matter. With me to discuss the issue is Martin Wolf, Chief Economics Commentator of the Financial Times. Now, Martin, in your column today, you said the EU was actually too important to get worked up about immigration. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is that obviously we do have a large flow of net immigrants from the EU, and was about, I think, 142,000 over the last 12 months that's just been reported. But the evidence we have is, first, these people work overwhelmingly. They have a much higher rate of work, of numbers in employment than actually the natives, and let alone other immigrant communities. They're young, they're active, they're hardworking, they contribute to taxes, they're not a net drain on welfare. We don't know whether they will stay here forever or go home. If they go home, that will remain the case. But they clearly have been among our most desirable immigrants. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And furthermore, I point out that net immigration from the rest of the world continues to be higher than that from the EU. And even if the government had been successful in reducing net flows of immigrants from the EU to zero, which of course was never possible since there's a rule against it, they would still not have met their target. There's a very fundamental point, however, which is inherent in the question, which is that the EU involves many decisions, many benefits to us, many issues, city and all the rest of it. The immigrant flow is something we're not going to be able to stop. They are never going to accept a derogation from the principle of free movement. The other members will never agree to that. We are trying to do something which more or less ineluctably will force us to leave the EU. And the issue here is something that almost certainly benefits us. So to leave the EU over something that actually benefits us strikes me as completely mad.
But immigration really is the topic of the moment. I mean, just to quote Ed Balls, the Shadow Chancellor, this week, he said, it's the most intelligentsia nonsense to say that people have been brainwashed about something that isn't real. People really are feeling it. Are you just part of the intelligentsia nonsense?
Well, it's perfectly clear that large net inflows of immigrants overall, and we have had large inflows now over the last 10, 15 years, affect the country. And I think it's completely reasonable that the government, to the extent that we can, should have a plan for it. And we can control non-EU immigrants. We can ensure that they are on the whole people who will contribute productively to our society. It's perfectly reasonable to do so. As I said, I think the cost of trying to do that vis-a-vis the EU means basically we have to leave, and the costs of that are enormous. Of course, there are issues in terms of pressure on infrastructure, pressure on house prices, and the government has to be prepared to spend on that.
And how about pressure on welfare benefits, particularly in-work benefits? So the Prime Minister has just said that he wants to create a 4-year limit before EU migrants can gain access to these benefits, citing the fact that we have a different sort of benefit system to many other countries which were contributory, so they sort of have these rules anyway. I mean, is this something that would actually be a good settlement?
I think it's a perfectly reasonable proposal. I don't think it's actually going to make much difference because the evidence we have, as I've already indicated, is that the immigrants from the EU don't come here to get benefits and don't on the whole get benefits. I mean, it's not what they're here for. They're net contributors. But if it makes people feel that it's fairer, that people can't just arrive and get benefits, which, as you pointed out, in contributory systems, which are the systems in most continental countries, they don't get anyway. Well, and if that's accepted by the European Court, which I hope it would be, I think it's a perfectly reasonable political proposal. It won't make any substantive difference. I think actually the really big issues are about our ability to create housing, infrastructure, absorb a growing population, which is partly
because... That's, of course, nothing to do with the EU. That's our own problems and our own restrictions and our own regulations.
That is the regulations we have, the refusal to expand public investment. And by the way, even our own population is growing just because of births at the moment. So there are issues here, but they shouldn't be tied up with the issue of immigration from the EU.
Well, Martin, I think this topic is going to run and run. Martin Wolf, thank you very much. And there'll be more information on this on ft.com.